Network Africa. Hope for almost 100 migrants rescued this week as 5 EU countries agree to take them in. Lockdown in the Cameroonian city of Bamenda as violence erupts following the sentencing of separatist leader Sisiku Ayuk Chabe. And newly appointed Prime Minister of Sudan commits to solving the economic crisis in the country. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. There is renewed hope for almost 100 migrants who finally disembarked in Italy as 5 EU countries have agreed to take them in. Spain, France, Germany, Luxembourg and Portugal have offered to take some of the migrants who finally touched ground on the island of Lampedusa after being stranded for weeks at sea. They were allowed to disembark after a persecutor ordered the evacuation of the vessel. Italy's Interior Minister, Matteo Salvini, has taken a hard line on migration as he refused the migrants to leave the ship for nearly 3 weeks, though dozens of children and the sick had been taken ashore. Earlier in the week, about 10 migrants jumped off the ship, hoping to swim to the island. We'll have more on that, but in the meantime, the Cameroonian city of Bamenda is in lockdown after violence erupted there following the sentencing on Tuesday of separatist leader Sisiku Ayuk Chabe and 9 others to life in jail. Businesses have been shut and people have been staying at home after shooting between separatist rebels and soldiers. Residents in the city, which has the biggest English-speaking population, say they are hopeless about there ever being a way out of the crisis through dialogue. Cameroon's English speakers say they have been sidelined for decades by the central government and the French-speaking majority. Protests over the increasing use of French in courts and schools in Cameroon's English-speaking heartlands, the northwest and southwest regions, morphed into violence in 2017 and a call for an independent state called Ambazonia. Let's head back to our main story today, where there is renewed hope for almost 100 migrants who have finally disembarked in Italy as 5 EU countries have agreed to take them in. Joining us now is a human rights activist, Olatunji Larry Bariwa, to discuss more on this. He joins us from our Abuja studios. It's good to see you, Olatunji.
Good to see you too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So while the actions of these EU countries is commendable, this doesn't really solve the actual problem, though, of migrants risking their lives by trying to cross the Mediterranean in small boats, does it?
So far, the crisis, the continuation of a large number of Africans embarking on this dangerous journey, it may not come to an end soon. If you look at about 80 to 90% of these Africans who are trying to get to Europe through the Mediterranean are economic migrants. They are people seeking greener pastures, people seeking better opportunities. They are not necessarily people running away from crisis or conflict, which we ordinarily thought to be the major drivers of people who are fleeing across borders. But no, and economic aspirations will continue to be a major force. And you can't really stop people from aspiring. A lot of Nigerians are finding, the proper legal channels to get to countries like Canada, Australia right now, and that's very rampant now. But you will continue to have people who also have lower means, who are underqualified for the proficiency level required in those countries, seeking the alternate and illegal migration route. And that's going to be with us for some time. We might have to deal with that. It will take a lot of multilateral cooperation among countries on the continent to deal with this.
Yeah, Olatunji, you mentioned those people that do have, the lesser means of, migrating. Yesterday, the Italian government made a valid point about being the only country receiving these migrants in Europe. How does the EU agreement years ago on receiving and processing these migrants hold up?
There's been, I know one, we can't point all the accusing finger at the European Union, for instance, but there's been a lot of double standard with the EU. And if you look at a country like Spain, Spain does not allow migrants to come in unless we are faced with an international, controversy as this. The open arms, the ship that was carrying the 163 migrants that was just allowed to dock yesterday, the ship is facing an imminent fine of about €1 million in Spain. And even Malta and the Italian government stopped allowing rescue ships for migrants to dock at their ports since last year. So when you look at this, you look at it, it's a shame that we are talking right now and about allowing people whose life are at risk to be able to dock in a country. It's undignifying, and I think the European countries need to, treat this with a different sense of urgency and look at it in a much more compassionate way.
Yeah.
If you say ships are not allowed to rescue people on the waters, on the Mediterranean, that means you're telling them to just die, that anybody who gets on the water should die. So if there's an opportunity to rescue them, let them get them out, let them get them to the ports. I know that there's a whole lot, a lengthy process to deal with asylum seeking and documentation in those countries, but it's undignifying. And there's a lot of double standard in Europe, but the far right is in control in many of these countries. If you look at Matteo Salvini in Italy, you see people like Viktor Orban in Hungary and the Polish president, you see the Maltese government. There's a lot of hostility towards migration, and I think it's a misplaced hostility at the moment.
Yeah, I have to say there has been, a lot of restrictions put in place, to try and curb this. And if one thing has become clear, it's that migration is inevitable. But how can irregular migration be curbed without also putting people's lives at risk?
It takes, what I said in the very first line was that we need multilateral cooperation, multilateral within the African context. For one, I think the African governments are not doing enough concerning, these numbers of young Africans trying to seek the legal way into European Union. And what I mean, the African countries are not doing enough. We need to have a more systematic open border system within the continent. 90% of migrants within Africa, they move within Africa. African migrants, about 90% of them move within the African continent, but we need to have an open border system. We need to allow people to move freely within Africa and let people be able to seek their aspirations in different parts of Africa before you start talking about Europe. It's because of the close-up nature of our borders within Africa that push people to Europe. And a lot of people also have misconceptions about Europe. But while we are working on economic development, we don't have to shut the door on infrastructure. If you are trying to work on healthcare, you don't have to shut the door on youth empowerment. If you're working on social, intervention, you don't have to shut the door on other, means of development. Human capital development is also something else. If you're trying to do education, you don't have to stop doing this. So African countries need to, collaborate more and relate with each other and share information, share numbers, and know the kind of problems you envisage from different countries, that border each countries. And in that way, if they come together, we'll be able to deal with some of these problems. But technically, you may not. And as a continent, we can't stop people from seeking, greener pastures whenever they feel or desire to.
All right, then, human rights activist Olatunji Larry Bariwa, it's been interesting getting your thoughts on this. Thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Moving on now, Malawi's President Peter Mutharika has vowed to deploy the military to all borders and airports to prevent any disruptions by demonstrators who are planning mass rallies across the country. Opposition and civil society groups have announced they will be holding mass massive protest that will include disruption of services at borders and airports. But Mr. Mutharika warns that he would take all necessary measures to defend the country from those he says want to usurp power from him. Malawi has faced increased rallies since last May, following the narrow and controversial win of Mr. Mutharika in elections that the opposition claimed was plagued by fraud and irregularities. The opposition has lodged a challenge to the poll results at the Constitutional Court, which is currently listening to the petition. Now, the former Vice President of Zimbabwe, Felekezela Mpoko, has been granted bail after appearing in court on corruption charges. Mr. Mpoko was a co-vice president under Robert Mugabe. He served alongside current President Emmerson Mnangagwa when Mr. Mugabe was ousted by the military in November 2017. But the two former deputies have fallen out. Local media reports that Mr. Mpoko was part of a faction that wanted Mr. Mugabe's wife, Grace, to succeed him rather than Mr. Mnangagwa. The Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission is also seeking to talk to him about alleged abuse of office. And in South Africa, the mayor of the city of Johannesburg, Herman Mashaba, has escaped another vote of confidence in council, for now at least. The much-anticipated motion, which was expected to be voted on this afternoon, was withdrawn at the last minute by the African National Congress. Our correspondent, Itumeleng Mafisa, was at today's session in the Johannesburg City Council and now reports.
Before proceedings to remove Mayor Herman Mashaba started, different political parties came singing and chanting, ready for a showdown. Following the mayor's question and answer session in chambers, the long-awaited motion of no confidence was abandoned by the African National Congress.
We will retable it in the next month. Second half.
Mayor Herman Mashaba survives his second motion of no confidence, with the ANC preparing to launch another one in September.
Our residents out there expect uninterrupted service. I think for the ANC, up to yesterday, they issued a statement that they've got 145 the voters. Perhaps that did not have enough money from CR17 to buy enough votes. Maybe they made the commitment and maybe didn't come out with the money.
The ANC in Johannesburg says its decision to withdraw the motion of no confidence was not a sign of weakness, but a strategic decision.
Remember, in a motion of no confidence, in a situation where you do not have an absolute majority, you consult with other parties that need to support you as you go into the motion. The negotiations have been going on up to the door of the council. Some of the issues raised by our partners and those who support the ANC were such that we decided let's tactically withdraw the motion for now. The reasons for the motion still stands. That's why the motions will still be presented at the September meeting.
One of the three major political parties in the city, the Economic Freedom Fighters, is set to be the kingmaker as far as a vote of no confidence is concerned. The ANC and Mashaba's DA would need support from other political parties, including the EFF, should they want to advance their cause. Mayor Herman Mashaba survived another motion of no confidence. He was elected into office on this day exactly 3 years ago. It remains to be seen if he will complete his term in 2021, with the ANC expecting to put another motion of no confidence in September. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Itumeleng Mafisa, Channels Television News.
Now, Sudan's new Prime Minister is committing to achieving peace and solving the economic crisis of the country after being sworn in. Mr. Abdullah Hamdok was sworn in as transitional Prime Minister on arrival from Ethiopia, where he has worked as a respected senior economist for the UN since 2011 before stepping down last year. The swearing-in of Mr. Hamdok and the Sovereign Council marks the first time that Sudan has not been under full military rule since Mr. Bashir came to power in a 1989 coup. The United States, Britain and Norway welcomed Hamdok's appointment, calling it a historic moment for Sudan, and urged the military to engage with the new government.